So I would like to start with the second session. I hope everybody's back. I still see people coming in. For the second session, we will have 3 Spanish-speaking speakers. Good. Well, I think we started to warm up during the first session, which was really about identifying some of the issues and problems related to inclusive business or pro-poor businesses. We talked about power inequalities. We talked about the need for government and regulation. We talked about CSR definitions and practices, about support small-scale producers require to become more empowered. And there was also some recognition for the achievements and progress in both corporate social responsibility and in the fair trade movement. The 3 speakers now will focus more on practice, on what are organizations and businesses actually doing to address the challenges we came to identify in the first session in order to enhance the potential for producer empowerment. So first speaker will be Alberto Monterosso. He is leading an export company in Guatemala called, and I'm translating that, The Grower. He's working with a lot of small-scale producers and providing access to export markets for vegetables. Alberto, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Es para mí un orgullo estar en el Parlamento Europeo. Es algo nuevo para mí. Quiero primero compartir con ustedes que tengo 3 camisolas. Soy sociólogo y hago investigación social. Soy director de una ONG que ayuda a pequeños agricultores a desarrollar capacidades para mejorar sistemas de producción, mejorar manejo post cosecha y mejorar procesos de exportación. Y soy un empresario pequeño. He vendido a Walmart, le he vendido a Costco, he negociado en París, vendemos vegetales en supermercados de Inglaterra. Hemos tenido pérdidas económicas porque nos han tirado a la basura embarques, culpa de la burocracia.
Because of bureaucratic issues, we have had big economic losses. Well, now I would like to start saying that when a European or an American is 25 years old, they are entitled to buy alcohol. When someone from Guatemala or Nicaragua is 21 years old, these girls are usually married with 4 children and they've not finished their primary school. We're trying to talk about opportunities for people to better build their future, opportunities for people to do better business. I am not going to speak that much, but because I have only a few words, but I would like to look with you at the challenges for the small producers, small farm producers, for them to have access to markets. When we speak about a small producer in Guatemala, in Latin America, we speak about someone of indigenous origin or an indigenous person with 8 children. They usually speak little Spanish, and if they're lucky, if they're very lucky, they own 1 hectare of land. It's all they have to produce. So we're speaking about producers with very little access to land, which lends them specific characteristics. The only way for them to have access to more competitive markets is through an organization, because a small farm cannot produce enough to have its own relationship with marketing companies. We have a specific experience in the production and exportation of vegetables. We have chosen that because it was a good sector to enable us to help small producers, because it is a high consumption product on the local market, on the international market, on the Central American market, and it produces an income for the family of the smallholders. thousands. And in the course of the years, we've seen thousands of families from Guatemala who have succeeded in improving their income by producing vegetables. We produce vegetables for the Chinese market. We produce vegetables for the European markets. Beans are, we produce beans, green beans, and these beans are so important for the economy of Guatemala. The production of vegetables has enabled so many families to improve their income. And the change is transmitted from one generation to the next. The fathers who produce vegetables have the capacity to send their children to school. It means that the second generation has a higher education level, has a better production capacity, and a better living standard. But in order to reach that goal, to get there, the small producer must go through certification processes. It means that certain standards must be complied with, must be met, and some of these standards are very stupid. As, for example, they must certify that the land they are using is agricultural land. And it's a bit stupid because for the small producer has no other land. They have no other possibility to go elsewhere and produce. But because of that, certain standards and laws, they have to certify their land. Now, because of the certification, they have to learn a foreign language. They have to comply with specific protocols. They have to certify their seeds. Just to give you an example. 25% of direct cost, production costs to produce half a kilo of carrots is the cost of seeds. And big transnational companies own the seeds. It's not allowed for small farmers to produce their own seeds. So the companies are suing the small farmers when they reproduce their own seeds. Well, while our seeds existed for thousands of years before they were blocked by patents and taken by big companies. We think that certification certainly improves the standards. When we've seen families who, when they learned other farming practices, they improved their health because they started, for example, washing their hands, they started using soap, and that was new, and it went together with the new production methods and practices. So certification is good, but certification has become a business in itself. The producers work in order to be able to become certified. And now, it's just a standard. They don't earn more because they are certified. They are being told that vegetables are have the same worth whether they come from Guatemala or from Kenya. The producers are working for certification. They invest their time, their money, in order to get that certification, and very often the reward is not worth the effort. But certification for many people has meant all the same better access to market and better living conditions. The other challenge is knowledge, know-how. The small farmers, smallholders have no access to knowledge about different consumptions. The commercial middlemen, small businessmen, small traders have hidden the truth from them very often. We are trying to be a bridge. We try to link the markets with the small farmers to tell them about the true value of what they're producing. I think that the most serious challenge is that of funding. The small farmers provide vegetables, fruit to the London supermarkets such as Marks and Spencer, Carrefour in France, Walmart in the United States. And they get paid 40 days later if they are lucky, otherwise 90 days later after they supplied the goods. If they are They ask to be paid before. They just say that they don't pay. They wait for 1 month before paying. And they pay with a discount. Costco, for example, I spoke to the managers. They pay the bill after 2 months. So we speak about funding. It's not only, we do not speak only about resources to be able to produce. We speak about the fact that the small farmers are funding the consumption in developed countries. We fund Wilmore in England. We fund Marks and Spencer. We fund supermarkets, big supermarket chains. We have discussed, we've talked to supermarket managers, supermarket chain managers, and we spoke about the need to give incentives to the companies. They should be, for example, tax breaks for given to the big companies if they accept paying the bills of the small producers after 5 days. It would really be a great help to the producers. They suffer a lot from those late payments. So during the last 7 to 10 years, what's happened has been a concentration process. Small groups of producers, small cooperatives have become united in order to sell their vegetables to big companies. But as they cannot wait for their payments, they end up going bust, going bankrupt. And the big companies, the big European and American companies, concentrate the suppliers. It means that in Guatemala now we have 4 or 5 big companies that control 60% of the whole production of vegetables. But they do not produce the vegetables. The vegetables always come from small producers, smallholders' farms, which are forced to sell them their products, and thus further concentrating the wealth. When we speak about CSR, it seems that all the companies are sowing trees every end of the year, but the CSR should take into account the need to pay promptly the small farmers. They cannot expect a small producer from Uganda, from Kenya, from Guatemala, from Peru to develop a marketing capacity in Europe without any support. If they don't get any support from big distributors, they cannot develop their capacity. They cannot invest in risks, in preventing risks, in plastics to protect their crops, invest in packaging. It's impossible for them to do that if they do not get paid. So it deteriorates, it destroys the small initiatives of the small producers in their attempts to have access to markets. When we speak about inclusive business, we've seen how Walmart has been working in North America, and we've sold to Walmart. For 5 years, we've been the suppliers of Walmart, and we got a certificate, a good supplier certificate. But we've seen that these practices of co-investment and co-responsibility have not changed. These bad practices have not changed. Those who suffer the risks from the risks of production and marketing are the small producers. You get an email, you get a fax telling you that the product has had a problem and that a specific amount of the product, of the whole of the product, has been lost, but nobody shares the risks. The risks are all on the shoulders of the small farmers. So who includes whom? I think that we, the small producers, we've included in our business the big companies and the big supermarket chains, but the supermarket chains and the big transnational companies have not included us because we fund their trade. And we have made possible the growth of their growth of millions of dollars in certain European regions. Now, fair trade. People say that justice exists in the eyes of those who see it. What is fair for some people is unfair for others. The fair trade puts ceiling prices to purchase products. But it's not the choice of the producers. It is, and I want to end saying that it's very important to recognize the difference. The small producers pay higher prices for their fuel because they're in very remote geographic locations. They have to pay for higher transport costs. They don't get any support from the governments, of course. We've asked small producers in Guatemala how much they get as an employment subsidy a month. It is something that doesn't even exist in Guatemala, an employment subsidy. So the differences and the inequalities have to be recognized in order to make adequate proposals that would enable them to demand new conditions and change the environment in which the small producers can supply their local markets and other more competitive markets by creating wealth, but by benefiting too from that wealth they create. I'm sorry for having spoken so long. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to continue with the second speaker, which is Merlin Preza. She's president of the Latin America and Caribbean Network of Small-Scale Fair Trade Producers, CLAC. Floor is yours.
Buenos días todos, todas. Antes quiero agradecer la oportunidad.
Good morning to you all. I'm very glad to have this opportunity to share with you our concerns and reflections. The concerns and reflections of the organizations of small producers in Latin America. We are from, well, of course, we're from fair trade, but not only. I'm very lucky to come from an organization of small coffee producers from the north of Nicaragua. And we've been supporting the development of fair trade for many years. We have examined the pattern of our market, have been working on the market of fair trade and in other areas, and I know a lot about the practices. Well, for us, it is not always a system based on certification. It is based on different components. It has different pillars in order to enable small producers to develop in a country. We are worked on empowerment. It's basic because it's helped our organizations to grow and develop. We've worked on minimum prices. Sometimes these minimum prices have not always been favorable, but in other cases we've been able to obtain minimum prices that fit into our reality. And then the pre-funding of our crops, that has been a tool, a very valuable tool that has enabled us to sell in very different in very different conditions, and also the environmental friendly practice. The small producers do not understand anything about climate change. They only understand their daily reality. They know that if they cut trees, there are less. Well, they don't even know that if they cut trees, they'll get less water in their well. They do not know that if they use pesticides, they are going to drink polluted water. They just work to meet their immediate needs. They don't have the necessary knowledge and capacity to do something else. What does it mean controlling one's life in very difficult conditions? What does it mean if you do not have an access to the markets? We have worked for the market, but the market has for years, but the market has never worked for us. I'm going to give the example of the coffee. The price of the coffee is currently very high, but the small producers are not getting any profit from that. Because I remember that the buyers used to feel uneasy because we had increased our price a little bit. The market price was $64 with producers that produce 20 quintals, because they have to refrain from using chemical products. They have to use environmentally friendly practices, and well, the fair trade conditions are much better than other market conditions, but they got the producers, out of 20 quintals of coffee, they got $2.3 a day. A small coffee producer earns $2.3 a day. How have we been able to survive on our markets? Well, first of all, we have subsidized our markets because the price that that was paid was not even funding the investments in the land and on the farm. So the farms have been deteriorating, and they don't even produce enough coffee because the small resources, the small earnings of the producers are not even enough to pay for their food. But we have improved the farms all the same. We have obtained resources. We have found the resources to invest in our communities. We've found resources for education, training, technical assistance to develop the quality of the products, thanks to our capacity to get organized. Nevertheless, despite the $2.3 a day, we've been organizing and strengthening our capacity.
Well, the buyers of our products have a commercial mind, so they want to buy cheap. And thanks to that same systems of fair trade, we have managed to get better conditions for the negotiations. We can negotiate better our sales. Even in some countries, we agree about the commercial terms. We can negotiate better with our products, and we can have a more balanced relation with the market. The market relationships are the same. There is a contract and conditions put on both sides. Many small producers companies in Latin America have followed this trend. But as I said, the most important thing is to get organized. Small producers must get organized before they get empowered. They can achieve some objectives individually, but they won't get developed. So for us, it is fundamental to invest in our organizations. These are somewhat slower processes because to get organized doesn't only mean to get together. We have to embark on a long-term process. We have to be able to make our claims and demands. We need to start our contacts with the government. And for this, the basis is to get organized and to have better relationships in trade. I also wanted to talk about a different issue. Within the current systems, when the fair trade movement was created, the idea was to give access to the small producer to a bigger and better market with better conditions, because there were a lot of bad practices, and we had to find a way for the small producers to have a direct access to market with better conditions. But as everything evolved, suddenly the bad ones are the small producers. The standards that are being developed are made to the expense of the market. So the principles changed a bit. Things got complicated, not only in fair trade, but in rainforest and any other movements. The small producers are the bad ones. And other actors were created in the system. So nowadays it is far more complicated to compete, and we have all the disloyal competition issue. Big companies enter the system, and they are competing directly with small producers with, of course, less capital, less technical capacities, and this has become a real problem that hasn't been solved yet in fair trade or in any other system. I also wanted to mention the roles played by the certificates, the labels, and the market. The certificates and the market have become an end by itself, and not a means, a purpose. They are a purpose. So the certifying companies are worried. They want to stay alive, and the markets need to reach their volume, so they have to adjust to the markets in order to increase their volume. And you see that in the certificate companies. But we need to put some kind of brake. Otherwise, we're going to increase in big volumes. But for whom? Who are we going to favor? For us, it would be very good that all small producers had access to the market. But all this must be made within fair conditions without falling into disloyal competition. And lastly, well, unfortunately, I don't have too much time, so I can only mention things superficially, but I wanted to discuss the issue of roles. We say many times that the big companies are supported by the northern governments, and they are helping the access of small producers into the market. They are helping small producers to have a more decent life. But I think it is the government's role to guarantee the market laws so that the companies that come into our countries fulfill their obligations. Otherwise, we will be giving subsidies to big companies to fulfill the requirements that they are already obliged to do. This happens with climate change. All resources are now earmarked for climate change. Some resources that were earmarked for development, when they fall through the hands of big companies, they change route. We are solving a problem that they created, and they are the responsible ones for solving it. But now the resources are more addressed to climate change and less addressed to the development in these poor countries. So we have to reflect more upon these issues. If we want to advance in the labor relationships, if we want big companies to enter into fair trading conditions with our products, we need to create a set of rules for this game, and there must be more resources to promote development. And it is possible. We have examples, good examples in our countries, small producers that have better conditions, but there is still a lot to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing in the smallholder perspective into this debate. Now we are moving towards the third and final speaker, Miguel Mendes. He's country representative of SNV, the Netherlands Development Organization in Nicaragua, and he's also heading the agriculture sector within SNV for Latin America. Go ahead.
Okay. Bueno, muchas gracias primeramente por invitarme de última hora.
Thank you very much for having invited me. It is a great pleasure for me to come here and share with you the things that we have done in the issue of inclusive businesses. SNB promotes the inclusive economic development of emerging markets to reduce poverty. Our main approach and our main target is to reduce poverty. And to this end, we develop strategies, innovative strategies, impact-oriented, with private and public actors that are going to improve the conditions of small producers, and that are going to provide more employment possibilities, better incomes, and more decent lives to the poor. Having said that, I would like to make a little summary of the things that I have understood as the main challenges that have been discussed in this seminar, and I would like to divide them into 4 groups from my personal perspective. There is a main challenge, which is access to market. We always talk about the same, which is a key issue. I think we all agree on this. Secondly is competitiveness. Of course, small producers don't have the access to empowerment or technical assistance in good time, because they don't have access to innovation or new technologies that allow them to be more productive, more efficient, and more competitive. And another important issue is the access to capital, to credit. I think that we've talked with producers in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and they always say the same. Access to capital is an important challenge. And also a very important issue that I would like to mention during this discussion has to do with competitiveness. Competitiveness is affected by the lack of trust among the stakeholders in the whole value chain. There is a lack of trust between the private company, small producers, NGOs that are working in the sector, and this lack of trust prevents all interaction. Therefore, we can't gain scale or opportunities to be more efficient in the value chain. And two more points mentioned by Rajiv. One is sustainability. How many years of experience do we have in working with small producers, and how successful have we been in the sustainability of our actions? Generally speaking, of course, there are always exceptions. And a very important issue as well is stability. How can we act? How can we cooperate? How can we work on development from the private, public, cooperative point of view? How can we be stable with very little resources? How can we have an important impact and to have a bigger scale? Not talking about 200 producers, but 2,000, 3,000 families, or 20,000 families, or 100,000 families. Why not? Because at the end of the day, the big challenge of poverty is a huge challenge still to overcome, and it is getting bigger and bigger. As S&B, we have done a few things. I would like to share them with you. Well, I will start explaining to you our experience in Latin America. As you all know, most of you will know, Latin America is a region with a high level of inequality, as you know. There is a lot of inequality, and this is a good factor for conflict, for social conflicts. It favors social conflicts, as we have seen in the last years in our countries. And cooperation is being reduced in Latin America. We see this in S&B, Latin America. We have an agreement. S&B has an agreement with the Dutch government for subsidies by 2015, but in the case of Latin America, this subsidy only goes until 2012, and since 2009 it has been reducing itself, so there's not much left anymore. And another important decision is that in our countries, the technical assistance services, innovation technology services that should be provided by the state do not exist, or those that exist are of a very low quality. And there is something else. Some of our achievements since 2007 in Latin America as NCP was to understand what were the private sector trends. And we saw this in a partnership that we had with the Inter-American Development Bank. We carried out a study with different Latin American countries, and we saw that companies, be it multinational, nationals, or regional companies, were more interested in having a closer relationship, a stronger relationship with small producers, or with Latin America in general. And this was a good contribution to work on sustainable development and to decide a concept of inclusive businesses. What is an inclusive business? Well, basically, it is an entrepreneurial initiative in which the company, which pursues the end of getting a profit, and it works with low-income people in a competitive way, and in the idea to get more profits. But what does it include? Well, basically, an inclusive business means that the company has a certain market to begin with, which is an important challenge for producers. So once you have this market, you have also the need as a company to provide raw materials, and this needs to be done in a sustainable way, and this is less expensive as paying all the time important amounts of money in order to just finalize a coffee deal. So companies are ready to invest in services of technical assistance. They are ready to provide a credit and capital to cooperatives that are well organized, and therefore they can gain more trust and they can define competitive prices in the local and international markets.
Algunos ejemplos de este, y voy a traer.
I have a few examples of that, and I will refer to a previous intervention that has to do with the Aguan Valley in Honduras. We have an inclusive business, Corporación Dinant is the name. And it is an inclusive business that includes Bes y Garifunas communities in the collection of nuts for the production of vegetable oil. These people have no other income, but their income has increased by 600%. They are Pesh and Garifunas indigenous women. So what has the company done? They have provided them with technologies that enables them to be more efficient in the management of these nuts, and as a consequence, their work can be is more profitable, and they get a fairer price. So it is a concrete project with technology transfer and technical assistance. Another specific example is that of is an example in Ecuador, where we have worked with maize producers, corn producers, with a large company called Pronaca. We have included maize producers in their value chain because theoretically Pronaca used to import that corn. So we decided, instead of importing, to develop a value chain at the local level in order to prevent or to reduce the outgoing currency, well, the spending, the costs, and it was a success. So in these inclusive businesses, there is always a technical assistance involved. Then another example about training and the access of capacity from small producers. With Atlantic in Nicaragua, we have developed an inclusive business where we're trying to improve the capacity of the small producers at the local level through a coffee school for them to develop their capacity, their farm management capacity, in order to improve the quality of the product. And through an alliance with CIRAD, with the CIRAD, we have developed hybrid coffee seeds that were more productive and that enabled them to improve their production, to increase their production. So these are a few examples of inclusive businesses we have developed. It is obvious that not all the relationships between the companies and the producers are inclusive. We have developed a tool which we call minimum standards, and it has enabled us to identify the requirements that should be fulfilled by such a business relationship, a commercial relationship, for it to be an inclusive business. If a company does really want to become an inclusive business, they must develop these criteria, these standards, apply these standards in order to make that concrete, to turn that into a reality and generate true inclusion. I would like the concept of inclusive business to be generalized. We are the leaders in the development of inclusive businesses, and I have listened to a few examples in which we have not been involved. And, well, I cannot say whether or not they are really inclusive businesses. theory is one thing and practice is another one. Practice and observation in the field. I could share with you more experience, but I would like to use the few minutes left to focus on the key factors that characterize an inclusive business. First of all, the initiatives must be business-centered. It's not philanthropy. It's not charity. It's not providing training for the sake of training and then taking a picture of the beautiful training group with the training suppliers or instructors. No, not at all. It must be part of the core business of the company. It should respond to a business opportunity, or it should be aimed at solving a business problem. And it should also be included in the ADN of the company, because it should be part of its strategy and mission in the short, medium, and long run. And that means that the development of an inclusive business must be headed by the CEO of the company, of the business. An inclusive business must be created where there is a true market opportunity. It should not be something that is deemed to die. It should be a growing thing, aimed at taking opportunities, seizing opportunities. Another issue is the issue of trust. It's very important, the issue of trust. It's indispensable that business partners should trust each other, and if there is no such trust, some way of creating it should be worked out. Then there is a need for investment capital to improve the productive capacity of the producers, capital for the whole issue of technical assistance, capital for credits, and in the case of inclusive businesses, we're developing investments of private businesses to contribute to development. And something very important is the need for coordinators, for people with ethics and among business leaders and among the small producers. It is important also to secure trust, confidence, and we've been playing that role, we as SNV, and it's very important that the different stakeholders in the value chain should be able to create synergies. And we have an important role to play to articulate all this. And the way in which inclusive businesses were built 3 or 4 years ago has changed, because we've been learning and we're increasingly developing case studies about our experience, our practices, and you can find more information about it on our webpage. You can find information about experiences that were supported by important development stakeholders, such as, for example, in Latin America, the Inter-American Development Bank, which has been working with us in the implementation of 3 major programs of inclusive businesses in South America, in Central America. We've had contributions of the Ford Foundation for systematizing case studies of inclusive businesses in the framework of SNV, but also other initiatives with the same characteristics as inclusive businesses, in order to create learning opportunities, in order to develop a true business model, or a truly inclusive business model, which should be sustainable and generalize the impact of inclusive businesses among the small producers.
Thank you very much. So these were the 3 speakers. Just to briefly summarize, I mean, they really intended to bring in a more practitioner's point of view, I would say. I think Alberto really elaborated the case of the vegetable producers in Guatemala, where he's highly involved in, where certification plays a very important role in creating access to export markets, but where he also signals a number of problems in the certification process. And, well, while being involved in this process, he also signals other challenges related to access to funding. He raises the issue of that the risks are all on the shoulders of the small-scale producers, and who is including who? Are the small-scale producers including the companies or the markets, and is it also the other way around or not? So I think that's a very provocative question. I think Merlin elaborated very well on the position of small-scale producers, mainly involved in fair trade, and how fair trade really helped them to enter more balanced relationships. But also, well, the system is changing, companies are entering the system, so that creates new opportunities and also some threats in terms of increased competition with small-scale producers. And she's also raising the point that, yes, small-scale producers have worked for markets, but have the markets worked for them? And then finally, we have Miguel from SNV elaborating on the inclusive business approach, which has been elaborated by SNV over the last couple of years. I think interesting your statement that, well, companies provide access to markets, so that's the starting point for developing inclusive business approaches, but at the same time recognizing that not all relationships are inclusive. So that means also you have to be very clear on selection criteria. You mentioned the minimum standards tool, which includes a number of criteria for assessing whether you're really seeing potential for creating inclusive business. So with these interesting practices being presented, again, the floor is open to you. I would like you all to be very concise in your inputs, to have limited inputs. Also looking at the time, we have less than half an hour for the debate, and I think it would be very useful to have a variety of perspectives in the debate. So, and we will finish, well, just past half past 1, and then we will have lunch. So, yes, floor is open. I saw 1 and 2. We start over there.
My name is Jorge Chavez Tafur. I live in the Netherlands, but I come from Peru. I would like to raise an issue which was mentioned briefly by the second presenter, which is that of roles and responsibilities. There's a very interesting discussion going on in Peru right now because we have just elected a new president, and he's a left-wing president, and everybody's scared that he's going to come with drastic changes, especially into the economic model. But even he seems to have accepted something which I didn't know is already written in the Constitution even, that the state is not allowed to start up businesses. That is the role of the private sector. So the state is expected to provide services and to set up the framework for the country. And all businesses, etc., that's for the private sector. So there's a very clear division. Now, if we're talking about empowerment, are we putting that burden on the private sector when it is in fact, isn't it in fact a responsibility of the state and of the government? Are we mixing things? I'm just perhaps being provocative. Yeah, we have already heard about the deficiencies in the governments, both whether if it is Honduras or if it is the Netherlands. But the last 3 presenters have also mentioned all the needs that need to be done. Is that not then the role of the government to make sure that such a thing takes place?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Lena. I'm also working for Hivos. And since we don't have a live stream today, we asked our southern partners to bring in some comments, which I would like to do today, relating to what Alberto said and also Merlin about Walmart and their practices. There were 2 examples coming from Central America, where in one case Walmart actually signed a contract with producers' organizations and in the end decided to not actually buy any products from them because the market was saturated already, which was... It seems Walmart seems to be quite an unpredictable partner, because in another case, Walmart didn't sign a contract and still bought all the produce. So the question is, what is their priority? And it seems more or less window dressing and CSR than core business really relate to what Miguel said. So the question is, do producers actually want to work with Walmart in Central America? There was an interesting comment as well from Peter Felder from Zimbabwe, who's working as a rural development consultant. And he sees a lot of opportunities for private sector companies, actually, because they have actually 4 possibilities to help producers. They can provide a market, which was also emphasized by Alberto. They provide transport, credit, and extension services. But he says there's one of the biggest problems is that it takes so many years to actually, for them to make it a lucrative and profitable relationship, because they have to invest a lot in the capacity building of the producers. And the third comment, and that's also one of the questions, at least I read it as a question, is from Kite to Trust, one of the Hivos partners as well in Southern Africa. Mr. Kallenberg, the director, says there need to be clear principles and agreements on set standards so that companies can work more easily with fair trade and organic standards. And he says he proposes he proposed more lobbying for the simplification of certification measures. So that's maybe a question for Chris and Merlin. Is it actually true that fair trade standards or other standards are so complicated that companies can actually not deal with it if producers adhere to these standards? So I think that's a question posed to the panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think, well, the question, you raised a number of questions which are really addressed towards Merlin and Alberto, so maybe one of you could answer. And then after that, I would like to suggest we come back to the other question on the empowerment of smallholders, the investments required, and who should take the responsibility for that.
Bueno, voy a tratar de...
I will try make a comment about the development of capacity, investment in developing capacity of small producers, and the question of the standards. I didn't really have time to speak about alliances, but I think that in order to achieve changes and in order to secure the empowerment of the producers and to help them improve their living conditions, because that's the ultimate aim, to help people improve their living conditions, we must work by coordinating our roles and avoiding reinventing the wheel. We should do different things. We should create better market conditions. We should cooperate, invest in development. There should be a well thought out collaboration between different stakeholders, because it's a long process. We're not going to achieve that fast. Our countries are so poor, people are so poor that we cannot just do that in a minute, overnight. We need a long time, but we lack resources. We need policies, we need international cooperation, and when are well-articulated local and national cooperation. As far as standards as concerned, well, when fair trade started, there were small underprivileged producers with a market that bought their produce just at any price. We called them coyote, these commercial middlemen who took our profit margin. They bought our product at our produce at very low prices. But the markets have been evolving thanks to the work from other countries. Now there are many certifications, codes, and so on. But there was a pressure to create standards, better standards for the producers. But the standards are now heavier for the producers. The companies are putting pressure in order to make the standards lighter. But at the same time, they are very heavy for the producers. In fact, they can comply with those standards. But the issue is that in countries where we have up to 40% of illiteracy, it's very difficult for the producers to comply with these standards. They have good practices, it's their way of life, but they have to register them, they have to make sure they are guaranteed. We do not want lower standards. We want simpler procedures. That's something different. Lower standards would mean that anybody could enter the market without having to respect any standard. We do not want that. We want simpler procedures. And then they should be further regionalized or adapted to regional characteristics, because it's very much related to our local cultures. You cannot apply the same standards in Asia, in Latin America. In Africa, we have different social and cultural backgrounds, and in the case of the fair trade standards, that is what we would like. We would like a simplification of the procedures to make it easier, to make them easier to comply with for the producers. They should not be obstacles. They should be facilitating factors for the small producers to enter the markets more easily.
I would like to make some comments about your intervention. First, about Walmart. I have the opportunity to read the two cases, and that what to see here is there is no a clear strategy of Walmart in Central America and how to implement this inclusive business approach. Yeah, because there's two different ways they're doing in both countries. Maybe they have the intention, but they don't have the skill, the necessary skill and capabilities to do it. That's a comment that I will see. And about that you said in Zimbabwe, I had the opportunity last month to be in several countries in Africa, and I realized that same problems that are dealing in producers in Latin America are similar in these countries in Africa. And also I realized that these producers will want to have an opportunity to develop a long-term relationship with companies that ensure them, market, but also the possibility to really improve their competitiveness within the long term. And about certification, it is a process that is a cost process. And in my experience, in Latin America, we have several inclusive business working with coffee companies in Peru, also in Nicaragua, in Honduras, where certification is a key factor to develop. And they are investing in how to help cooperative and producers really to meet the standards for certification, because that's important for them because of the market needs. And only to add to that, we are working this also with investment for the companies, but also IIED has a program that is called Procaso, funded and implemented by Solidaridad and SMB, that is improving that and leveraging the resources of the companies.
Bueno, como no puedes criticar.
Well, I'm not going to criticize that. Just wanted to explain a concern that we have regarding the multinationals and the certificate issue. Because everything is interrelated, the consumers know about this. There is a high demand, forever growing demand. When we started, nobody really believed on it. They thought that we were a group of fools selling that idea. Although some people did indeed believe in the concept. I remember that we started in Holland selling a couple of coffee sachets. And that's how the market really started. And at that time, nobody really believed in it. There were commitments and there were important relationships, but it was that. And the pressure made by the consumer was what really made the system start. So big companies have seen the certificates as an important opportunity to keep their consumers and their sales in the market. But there are good practices in some countries, and well, we see that there are some pressures on the certifying companies to lower the standards, to delete the minimum price, etc. So they try to lower the standards to their benefits. So they give you help, they give you some help, but at the same time they're pressurizing you because everything is integrated, as I said. So they want the system to be more flexible. So they give us some help, but they withdraw it at the same time. So we have to be careful. There might be good intentions, but they must be coupled with good practices. Otherwise, it would be to no avail.
No, just to respond a bit, and a little bit on the way that conversation has moved a bit, and echoing Marilyn's comments, is I look at the title again, I want to go back to the question of smallholder empowerment. And some of these investment strategies that we're talking about, you think of the nature of the partnerships in the context of inequality. And you ask what is being invested in, or some might say subsidized, but we've effectively questioned the direction of the subsidies, right? And I see, unfortunately, many times what's being subsidized is the inequality itself. It's not being alleviated. And there is a study my colleague did in Mexico saying same thing with the large and small producers in the country. It happens in the United States, certainly with the size of farmers. But also I look at some aspects of this inclusive business model. It's not something I have studied deeply, but I question if you are focused on the issue of smallholder empowerment. Are you working to have power with smallholder organizations? That entails a kind of empowered partnership directly with those organizations. Or are you trying to create a system of power over? And if you're talking about power over these organizations, you're going to partner with some of the very businesses that have often not solved historically over decades and sometimes even centuries the systematic problems of disempowerment and exclusion. So I think we might, and that raises a question of governance again, particularly with the shifting patterns of cooperation. Who is going to guarantee even the semblance of a more balanced partnership?
Okay, this is a very provocative input, I can see. I would suggest Miguel first, and then some of the other two people on the other side.
For me, the question is what empowerment means for the producers. That means that they have more capacities to produce a better quality of products, and they have, of course, the possibility to negotiate a better price because they have better quality, so they can bargain for the price. I don't know. I believe that if you increase the capabilities of the producers, even though if this increase of capacity is done by an NGO or by the company itself, yeah, it's empowerment, yeah, and they will have the capacity to increase productivity, to increase competitiveness, to have more income because they will surely sell their coffee or their products to the market and will have the money to send the girls and the children, the kids to the school, and then next generation will be better. Yeah, that's my point.
Maybe we had a discussion on this yesterday evening, and then you mentioned also that it's not about exclusive linkages with just one single private sector, but that you're also focusing on choices. So okay. I think that's a good point to bring in. Maybe you can elaborate.
Thank you for your point, and I will take advantage of that to bring an example of this. We are working in Nicaragua and also in Ecuador with milk processing companies. And these companies are very focused on quality. So we are working with them in inclusive business, incorporated smallholders to their value chain in order to get them quality of milk. So this collecting centers and cooperative has increased their quality of the milk. That now other companies are trying to get the milk of them, and they have the decision to sell or not. And some of them are selling to another company because they offer constantly, yeah, in a sustainable way, a better price. But some of them are doing two things. They're selling to the company most of the milk, and one part to another one.
Okay, yes, you're first and then you were second.
Okay, I totally agree with Chris on the issue that is here on the inclusive business model. It's about empowerment, because who is in the driver's seat? And it's not about, is it a win-win? Naturally, it's about a win-win. But what big win, and win for who? There's always a win. You give nice cases of that it was successful, parting from the private sector. I'm for cooperation with the private sector, but I think who has to take the initiatives are the organized, strongly organized small producers, and who can negotiate with the private sector. And it is, you said the dairy sector. I have nice cases, cases where when organized farmers go to negotiate with the private company who have the knowledge, who have access to the market and all that, you see that you can play on the market. And I have examples like in Brazil, where farmers' cooperatives of dairy farmers were negotiated with Nestle, with Parmalat, different companies. And what you saw, that with giving them the knowledge how to negotiate, you give a very better position. Because it's not a thing that when the farmers are in the driver's seat, it will give a total other form of company or structure than when it's, and it seems to be the same, but it is a totally different concept.
Okay, yeah, thanks. My name's Kia Smith, I'm from Unrest. And I wanted to pick up on that theme in terms of what is being subsidised, is that this inequality itself, and making this distinction around disinclusion or exclusion. I think it links back to that question about whose values are being prioritised and whose values are actually being enacted upon and put into standards. And I want to raise an issue that hasn't been discussed at all, is the role of women and gender. And when we talk about empowerment, considering fair trade's full, really heavy focus on gender empowerment, and when we look at how these standards and inclusive business models, whether it be fair, ethical, inclusive business, CSR, to what role do they actually pick up on the kind of activities that women smallholders actually do to improve their livelihoods on a day-to-day basis? And I think that this is something that's a real challenge for all of these business models. So for example, and speaking from my own experience in Kenya in French bean farming for smallholder women, I mean, a lot of these standards, the scope of what is actually being regulated or included actually excludes a whole range of livelihood activities that women smallholders do on a day-to-day basis, such as their food security, their environmental management knowledge, their interactions with local markets and family subsistence, which actually don't come into the regulatory scope of when you take a supply chain model. And the second part would be the actual institutions, and where you look at where women are actually enacting any kind of empowerment in that governance sense. And there's a role of a whole range of local institutional processes by which women do enact more power with, and power to shape their food systems, which actually are excluded from discussions between cooperatives or exporters, for example. And one of these might be women's groups, for example, where women share money, and that actually subsidises a lot of the agricultural production that's going on straight into export markets. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you for bringing in that new perspective. There was one person who wanted to respond already earlier.
Our experience is that the way workers are protected is either through the application of law or through what they do themselves to protect themselves, such as through trade unions. And I think one of the concerns I want to raise here is that where fair trade certification includes labor practices, we sometimes find some of this questionable, particularly where we're talking about practices that are well beyond the scrutiny of labor inspection and where there are no trade unions or independent trade unions that can exist. And so we think that there are a lot of problems here that need to be looked at in terms of an institutional approach to ensuring the application of standards, and the kind of inspection that goes on in fair trade certification is not adequate at all. And we have experiences where we know that workers engaged by small holdings are not the beneficiaries of any of the premiums that are paid to smallholders. And I just wanted to introduce this notion into this meeting. I'm not going to take too much of your time.
Okay, thank you.
There's something very interesting in this discussion, which is the need to define well the terms that we are using in our debates. We have talked a lot about empowerment and the fact that empowerment can mean different things for different people. Another word has to be defined, which is inclusion. I think there are two different trends to define inclusion. On the one hand, we can prioritize the technical aspects, and on the other hand, we can have a more political view of it. We can talk about technical inclusion, but we have to remember that sport producers are families, most of all, communities, peasants. For them, the land is also the territory that they inhabit, and they have no knowledge of it. So they have something to say as to how things are done, how resources are distributed. If we recognize this, we have to recognize that these visions may be different to the divisions of other actors. There is a conflict that can only be solved through a democratic process. And in this sense, it is interesting to see inclusion from the political point of view in order to take into account this capacity of small producers to participate in the definition of the model.
No, I just wanted to make a quick point related basically to a few things. Number one part is that the large corporations in the role, and we heard some few of them, and if we go to the other examples and a whole lot of areas where abnormal profits in terms of the pricing, or in one particular case, which came up in India, was that after the seed prices, particularly of particular, I won't take the name of the company, it's very obvious. So it just went up 4 times. And when the government imposed a pressure, they said this is absolute, because farmers just screamed. And once the civil society got in, they said it's wrong. And they dropped the prices almost 1/4 what was being sold earlier. And they went happily thereafter. So I think it raised a lot of suspicion in terms of, what level of profit is right, and in the name of stakeholder interest, how exactly do you sort of manage that process? That's one. The second part, I think, around the small producer issues, and I think very eloquently said that who owns the entire well-being of the small producer? I mean, where does the ownership lie? So like in a company, we know how it is, it sort of lies. I mean, small producer in his own little way sort of owns it, but there are a lot of gaps, and in the point of debates what we're having today, which are neither addressed by a large corporate, nor is it addressed by the state today, or nor is it addressed by any other alternate mechanism as to who owns it. And I think where these gaps are, whether it's about the infrastructure, capacity building, or a whole lot of other things which sort of come into play, I think that's the other issue which needs substantial address. And last part is that I think at the end of the day, whether large corporations or state intervention or whatever, I think creating the, I keep talking about the viability, but an institutional structure where they can stand on their own 2 feet and, through whatever mechanism, I think will be the most sustainable solution to this whole debate. Otherwise, why should I take the responsibility because my stakeholder interest is different? Why should I pay higher prices? Or should I get paid after 2 months or otherwise? I think that is what is so crucial to this whole small producer issue.
Yeah, thanks. I have a very short question because the question of scale was mentioned by Merling and by Miguel very shortly. I was wondering if, Miguel, maybe you could give me an example of an inclusive business within your scope that has, was able to reach scale, or to, for example, create more access to high-quality food products for the small-scale producers themselves, so the low-income markets within the regions where you're working in.
Christina Archer from The Body Shop. Really interesting discussions. What I haven't heard a lot of, though, is a lot more experience, with all due respect, but from South Asia. We talk a lot about pro-poor. We've been talking a lot about producer groups that have access to land or are working on land. By the very nature of having an asset like land, you're already not really, well, you're poor, but you're not very poor. So, again, are there any examples of inclusive business or business helping the people who really are at the bottom of the pyramid? So people who are mostly in, say, sub-Saharan Africa, but also the subcontinent continent who don't have access to land to become producers and get involved in agricultural supply chains. I also ask that because I've been working about 20 years in development and in Latin America and Asia, and what I'm seeing increasingly is as the young people who we've spoken about today are getting access to education, either because their parents are investing what extra money they're getting, or because there's fair trade premiums, or because government is fulfilling their responsibility and access to education is improving, none of those children or young people and none of their parents want them to be farmers. None of them want to be farmers. Couple that with land tenure and the sort of increasing division of land, I'm wondering in 10 years' time, what discussion are we going to be having here? Because who are going to be smallholders, and will there be any? And again, how will business be able to have a model that is helping poor people if poor people really aren't smallholders anymore because it's not worth their while, they don't want to do it, and even if they're paid a fair price, it's not in their interests. So just some provocative comments and questions, really.
We have experience with Atlantic and Nicaragua involving around 2,000 small producers. Also Perusa in Peru involving around 9,000 producers. Also Dinant in Honduras involving now 800 producers, but with the idea to scale to 1,000, how say, 1,500 collectors. That's the short question about that. And about the last question of the Miss, we have an inclusive business where in El Salvador, where there is a big problem for land because it's a very small country, and there is a large company that has a lot of land, and it's land that is not using. So part of the inclusive business is they give in comodato, I don't know how is the word in English, I think it's the same, to these producers this land for 5 years with the idea of, how we say, renovate it if the producers are okay and the company is okay. Yeah, these ideas are coming up. But the last one I want to say is, of course, I want to state that there is a lot of company interested to do better relationship with the producers. There is a lot of company that are doing relationship with the producers in a not sustainable way, in a no win-win situation. There's some examples, and we can find a lot. Some of them did that because they want to do it this way, and others did that because they don't know how to do it well. Yeah, and the inclusive business approach from our perspectives wants to really develop a market-based solution for social and economic inclusion in order to achieve poverty and high impact in the long term in a sustainable way. And that's why, because if this process is connected with the market, it will be sustainable at the time. And it will not depend on the Dutch government could fund for cooperation, or every government could fund for cooperation.
Discutiendo sobre comercio.
Well, when we discuss fair trade and inclusive trade, we always talk about trust. So small producers of the countries send coffee, honey, and they wait for 60 days to get paid. I think this is a sign of trust. We have seen in certain regions of Guatemala how they shared $50 of weekly payment between the members of a community. And with these examples, many girls could go to school. So things are changing. But I have to insist, if we talk about fair trade, social responsibility, inclusive businesses, we need to change the payment formula. If we change the payment formula, we pay quicker, then it would mean that in emerging countries, there will be many more funds. This is the subsidy that they need. So we need to change the way that people are being paid. And then we could change the logic and reinforce the trust in small producers.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would now really like to wrap up the debate, but I see Bill signaling. So, Bill, what would you like to
very fast,
bring in
response to the comment from the Body Shop, within this knowledge program, Small Producer Agency in the Globalized Market, we have commissioned a global study on intergenerational change and its link, of course, with shrinking farm size and collective action in markets with this huge change that's happening in the structure of smallholder agriculture. So we hope to have one of these kind of provocations in association with the launch of that study. So please watch this space, and thank you very much for the excellent point.
Okay, so we would really like to wrap up this debate, and for that I would like to ask Peter Utting, who's one of the co-organizers of this provocation, to share with us some of the highlights of the debate as he has observed it and the new insights he has gained. So Peter, again, very brief.
Right. Well, it's very tall order to sum up such a rich discussion. Looking at the pros and cons of fair trade and the implications for empowerment of fair trade, corporate social responsibility and inclusive business in 3 hours was a big challenge, but I think miraculously we've achieved quite a bit. So congratulations to all the speakers and the participants. Over the coming weeks, 2-3 weeks, I hope, Kia and I will be doing a more detailed summary of these discussions and debates, which we will prepare a report, and that will be disseminated widely on the websites of the respective hosting organizations. Here, I maybe just raise a few points that sort of came out for me from these discussions in no particular order. One, I think we got a sense of the dangers of the rhetoric running ahead of the reality in many of these things, whether it's in relation to corporate social responsibility, fair trade, or inclusive business. There is a danger that there's a discourse created around this which everyone sort of buys into, and I think we need to have keep a much closer grip on reality in terms of what's being achieved, etc. These different approaches, I think we've seen, provide some important tools, some important instruments, but they're not a miracle cure or a panacea if we're looking at these things from a development perspective. There's a danger that some of the agendas get diluted. So there's a danger with corporate social responsibility that it sort of gets reduced to things like occupational health and safety, planting some trees somewhere. Issues of labor rights often get ignored. Similarly with fair trade, there can be perhaps an excessive focus on the price. What is the price, instead of the aspects we've been concerned about here to do with empowerment and social organization of producers. And something we've been looking at a lot in our work is how in the field of corporate social responsibility, over the years, over 10, 15 years, we've seen this shift from sort of weak sort of codes of conduct to these initials MRV, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And I wonder from these discussions whether we need to add two other Rs to the monitoring, reporting, and verification. One R for remedy, effective redress through complaints procedures, something John Ruggie and others have been emphasizing a lot. And the other R is for redistribution of income, redistribution of value within value chains, and redistribution of power in power relations. So I think the MRV needs to become MRVRR. On the definition of empowerment, I think we've had a very interesting debate, sort of more technical definitions being put forward, focusing more on certain aspects of economic empowerment versus a more sort of political definition of empowerment. Now, back in the 70s, UNRIS coined what was a classic definition of participation, which was the organized efforts of the disadvantaged to gain control over resources and regulative institutions. And that, I think those political dimensions of participation empowerment we've talked about that a lot today. It's really about how to increase bargaining power, how to gain control, not just to mobilize resources, but also over other institutions, and how to exert claims on the powerful. So they're the sorts of things I think that have come out which enrich this whole notion of empowerment. We've heard a lot about this, Chris referred to it, it's snowing standards. And I think we all get this impression that standards are falling out of the sky. Everything is now on paper. Sort of in terms of design, some interesting, interesting developments, which Richard Howard particularly referred to recently. The question is, I see it two things. One, is there not this dual situation where it's snowing standards, but you get these contradictory processes taking place in terms of the ongoing race to the bottom, precarious employment, the ongoing sort of hollowing out of state institutions and weakening of state institutions, and the biases which Sanjeev and others talked about in government policy, which tend to favor sort of larger enterprises or richer states, he mentioned also. On the question of governance, I think that's been a crucial aspect that's come out, and that's probably one of the areas where we really need to focus attention. That governance matters, and it matters in relation to representation, who's speaking on behalf of the subaltern groups and the small producers, the question of the extent of inclusiveness in governance arrangements in these different initiatives we've been looking at, and we've seen there can be big variations in that, and in relation to the key role of contestation in this. These things aren't just going to happen in a top-down way. They have to be, they are contested, advocacy is key, etc. And I think we come back to this on the question of a new vision of development, that we can't reduce things to sort of a market-based focused, that development, we need to recognize development is a very complex thing, that it is very multifaceted. Merling mentioned a number of the aspects. It's about empowerment, it's about price, it's about finance, environment, social services, health and education. It requires sort of a long-term perspective. We heard about the aspects to do with social capital and trust. And I'm glad I think it was the person from the Body Shop brought up this question of employment, and particularly youth employment, which in relation to agriculture is absolutely a critical dimension. So I think, we come back to this sort of broader notion of development, which is central. And we've also heard that there is no quick fix to this. It does require long-term commitments. It is about long-term sustainability. And we've also heard that there's not just one right way of doing this, that local context, regional context are crucial in deciding what works best and taking into account the realities of local conditions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, for this very well elaborated summary. It was a very complex debate I think we had today. A lot of issues were raised, and I think you really nicely connected them all together and related them to the theme of this provocation. So, yes, we're at the end of this provocation. I would really thank again the co-organizers of this event, being Vredeseilanden, UNRIST, and Richard Howard of the European Parliament for hosting this event here. And I would like to invite you all for a lunch, which will be served just outside this room. And, we will keep you informed on any follow-up of this provocation. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is the fifth and last in a series of provocations, and we will see to what extent we will continue with these provocations. And Bill already shed some light on some of the topics we might consider. So thank you very much for your active contribution and participation, and wish you a safe trip back home. And thanks, of course, to the translators who have been rather invisible but have done a great job. Thank you.